This is Chapter 12 from the Exploring Public Speaking open source textbook. This is Informative Speaking. Objectives for Chapter 12. After reading the chapter, students will be able to recognize opinion versus fact, recognize the different types of informative speeches, decide the best organizational approach for types of informative speeches, follow proven guidelines for preparing an informative speech, and be able to construct an informative speech. So the preview here, Chapter 12, Section 1 is about what is an informative speech. Section 2, types of informative speeches. Section 3, the guidelines for selecting a topic for your informative speech. And finally, Section 4, guidelines for actually preparing that informative speech, and then Section 5, including informative speeches in groups or giving them in groups. And we'll talk about that briefly, even though we won't be doing that in this class per se. Okay, an informative speech is a speech based entirely and exclusively on facts and whose purpose is to inform. Okay? Rather than to persuade, we're not trying to amuse people, we're not trying to inspire them, we're trying to inform them. Okay? Facts that are used are statements that are irrefutable, that is, they cannot be argued. Okay? So you must state them precisely and should almost always substantiate them, that is, to cite or give the sources of that information so you can give it some weight and clarity as to the source of that information. So informative speech, again, a speech that should not incorporate opinion as its basis. Opinion being this idea of your personal view, an attitude or belief about something. It might be based on some facts, but it might be out of context with some other facts about the same topic. So opinion is different from a personal view, opinion, or belief. Okay, action could be the result of an informative speech, but it is not the goal of the speaker. The goal, again, is to inform. Okay, the goal of action is maybe the goal of more types of persuasive speeches, particularly a speech that's designed to convince people to, say, sign up for the blood drive. So types of informative speeches are history, bibliography, processes, concepts, categories or divisions. And starting with history first, we could do the history of, say, an object, baseball. Okay, the big game of baseball, about a saxophone. Could be a personal favorite of mine, the history of the bicycle. Okay, it could be about a place, for example, your school and its history, or Disney World and its history. It could be about ideas like democracy or freedom of speech. These are ideas as well, and we'd be informing about where these things develop and where they come from. That's the history side of it. A biography is very similar to the history speech, only in this case, we're doing it about a person. Okay, they can be living or deceased, but you want it to be someone of some note or fame, because if not, otherwise your research could be difficult. If they're not very famous, there may not be a lot about them out there. Pre-social media days, anyway. Processes. This is sometimes called a demonstration speech or how-to speech. You're providing the steps on how to do something. Like in the book gave the example of making chocolate chip cookies. Now, one issue with this is it's rarely universally agreed upon ways of doing things. You could get a package of Nestle Toll House chocolate chips and they've got a recipe around in the back and say, these are the steps, there you go. Other folks may say, if you do these other things in different steps in different orders, you come up with a better cookie. So it's not universally agreed upon, so in some ways not irrefutable, but in the end, you'd still end up with chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so that's how about this process is achieved, like changing oil, or how a bill becomes a law, or again, our cookies become from ingredients to cookies. We're focused on understanding the process, not merely necessarily the actual agreeing that every single thing has to be done exactly the same way. Okay. And then there's ideas and concepts. We're trying to explain the idea or a concept of something, like what does democracy mean? What is justice? These are concepts or ideas. The definitions, methods they give, and that's actually the textbook. It's in Chapter 7. We haven't covered that one yet. But classification, which is looking at the similarities of ideas and concepts. So you can say this is similar to or like something else. And differentiation is then pointing out the differences between that and the other things that people may know. Okay. Make your concept real with examples. We're talking about democracy. You would give examples of saying these types of things equate to being aspects of democracy, elections and, elected leaders and people being, the power being based upon the people. Okay, then finally, categories and divisions. The topic does not lend itself to a specific approach. Okay, this is sort of sometimes referred to as the general category, and organizational patterns, which are in Chapter 6, are chronological. In history, it's the sort of like how to do something, or a history, so you're going based upon time, this and then this, and then the next. Or think of a set of instructions to assemble a piece of IKEA furniture, the how-to, step 1, step 2. So it's chronological in the order that you need to do things. Spatial is by location. The best way to explain this might be a concept like if you're trying to explain where something is at, you could give the exact address and I could Google it and get directions. Or I might say, hey, do you know where this is? Well, if you go one more block and turn right at the stop sign on the second house on the left, that's a sort of spatial location you're describing based on other things they know or trying to describe the layout of a classroom, for example. Topical is probably one of the most common ways of doing this, which is you pick the areas that you'll talk about. This is most often used in terms of things. The way I'm organizing my speech is the topical thing. Here's my topic, and within that, I'm picking 2 to 3 to maybe even 4 areas within that big topic that I'm going to cover. Okay. So pick a specific or focused topic. These are guidelines for your speech. Not too big. The Civil War would be huge, but maybe you could do a particular battle. An easy one that comes to mind is the Battle of Gettysburg, which was a 3-day battle. So you could do, here's the events of day 1, here's the events of day 2, here's the events of day 3, and maybe possibly do it as something like that. Okay. Avoid false or faux topics, which is this idea of ones that are actually persuasive. I'm going to inform you why Disney World is better than Universal Studios. My kids would disagree. So that's actually trying to convince someone or persuade them. Handle controversial topics such as aliens or kind of conspiracies with care. If you want to do those, you have to kind of balance out and make sure you're giving both sides of those things. Again, we're looking for irrefutable facts, not opinions. So if you're putting something out there that's maybe can't be refuted or can be refuted, then you have to kind of list it as something that can be. Okay, avoid being too broad. Okay, Lincoln's administration was an example in the Civil War was the example they gave in the textbook. For example, you couldn't cover all of that 4 years of his administration, so much going on, but they did give some examples of things like his one of the areas being how the Emancipation Proclamation changed the nature of the war. Okay, again, be accurate, be clear, be interesting. Well, of course, I want to do those things. Be accurate means I've done my research. Clear means I can understand it. And interesting, that's going to get the people engaged and want to listen. Accurate, again, current information that's well researched and done that way. Clear for the audience. Always keep your audience in mind. It's clear for the audience, which is to say you might dig into your topic and become somewhat of an expert, maybe not a nationally recognized expert or something, but you know more about it. So you might say something and it won't make sense to someone else who doesn't know as much about your topic. So keep in mind that it's to be clear for everyone in your audience. And interesting, again, what's in it for them? Why are they interested in this topic? Keep that in mind when you're doing it so that you can say, when you're doing your speech, the things, your information you're giving them is things that will help them, that will keep them interested and engaged. Think always about this from the audience's point of view. What's in it for me? So keep audience diversity also in mind. This is the idea that for some people, your topic might be too complex. For others, some of the ways you do it might be too simplistic. So you've got to find that balance, which is sometimes hard to do. Communication circles, they sometimes refer to this as horizontal communication. You want to talk at the same level as your audience. You don't want to be too complex that you're talking down to them and they don't understand, or too simplistic that I'm talking beneath them and then they possibly even feel insulted, like, come on, we all know that. Okay. This is where an audience analysis can help. And I'm actually going to have an assignment for you where if you create an audience analysis, you can get extra credit for turning that assignment in. And if you cite information from your audience analysis and cite it as being from my audience analysis, it's simple to cite, then I'm going to give credit points also to that extra credit assignment. And so if you get points for doing it, and every time you use it in a speech, not every time, you couldn't do it like 5 times in a speech, but if you use it in a speech, it's additional points for each speech you use it in. Okay. And finally, this idea of giving informative speeches in groups is the last section here. Again, we are not doing that in this class. In my in-person classes, we have done that where they've done a narrative speech, which is somewhat persuasive, and I grouped their individual speeches together, and then they had to give more human interest aspects, elements to illustrate their speech, but we're not. But 2 types of doing this. One is a panel, which is a discussion by experts in front of an audience. The bulk of the time is spent in question and answer. They give a brief thing and then they're back and forth answering questions from the audience, which is different from a symposium, which is a group of experts give a series of specific informative speeches on a larger topic, and then they focus on the individual. The focus, rather, is on the individual speeches, which is the bulk of the time, and then there's a few questions at the end. Okay. If assigned for a class, one of the things they ask you to do or think about is appoint a moderator. A moderator actually is probably really good for the panel, where it would be a question and answer, but also for a symposium, a moderator kind of helps keep people on track and on time. This is a place for teamwork and consensus, working together. So avoid a strong leader insisting on a particular topic. You need to find something that is of interest to everyone, and be sure you don't overlap or someone goes rogue on their topic, which is essentially the role of the moderator. And keep in contact with your partners. You know how it can be with group work. Sometimes some person who doesn't do their part and everyone else has to pick up the slack. Okay. So in conclusion here, for informative speaking, it's helpful for your college career. You might be using this already in classes in high school, and you're going to use it again in classes in college, and particularly that panel or group presentations. For future work, they want you to present ideas or potentially sales pitches types of things. These are not, more informative about an idea, might be explaining it, which might be part of a bigger thing to persuade someone to do something. But the informative part is we're trying to get them to just understand the process or idea. And the important principles, again, relate to the needs of the audience. What's in it for me as an audience member? A clear structure, again, see Chapter 6 on organizing, and being interesting and attention-getting with my evidence. Okay. Chapter 12, informative speaking.